Hi, my name is Kevin Oliveira. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Forcepoint for the data security products, in particular data loss prevention or DLP products. Today, we're going to be talking about a strategy for migrating to Forcepoint DLP. I have a guest today, Abdul Pasha, and he is a Senior Manager for Professional Services. Abdul, could you maybe give an introduction as far as your background and what you'll be talking about today?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. My name is Abdul Pasha. As Kevin said, I'm a Senior Manager for Professional Services at Forcepoint. I've been with Forcepoint for about seven and a half years, focusing on our data protection and really, Kevin, helping customers achieve data protection, whether it's compliance or intellectual property. I'm excited to be talking about how they can adopt DLP.
Great, thanks. Before we go into the actual migration, we'll be talking about specific steps on how you as a customer are able to migrate to Forcepoint DLP. One thing I wanted to bring up, there is this belief out there that once you've implemented DLP, you'll never want to do it again. And I think the reasoning behind it is a major task. For the first time when someone does deploy DLP, it can be very time intensive. And it's also it's not only just deploying a product, but it's also deploying a business change. And it involves business, many different people in your business and how they work. And so it can be somewhat painful. The thing is, we don't think that it has to be that way. And one of the things that goes on with DLP, just overall, the companies change. Your company may have changed over since you initially purchased your DLP solution and deployed it. The companies that you purchased it from may have changed, and what they're able to provide for you may not be what you need to be able to meet the security issues of today. And so that's another reason why ultimately many customers get to a point where they see the risk versus the reward. They weigh the two, and they just see that the reward would be much better if they could deploy to a strong DLP solution.
And Kevin, just to say to that point, there's compliance, right? There's new laws coming in with digital transformation that every company is going through with COVID, working from home. There's structures that are changing from 2010, even 5 years ago. So it's always a constant change that we see, not just acquisition and mergers, which is absolutely important, but COVID has added new risks and digital transformation of companies that really required them to think differently.
Yeah, those are great points. Here's 3 things that we list out as far as what makes for a successful DLP deployment. One is the right product. And as Abdul was just mentioning, the growth of regulations, your ability to be able to deal with all of the different regulations that are out there and to be in compliance in many industries, that's changed over the years. And like with Forcepoint, we have over 1,500 predefined templates, policies, and things that classifiers that will help you in terms of your compliance, as well as just your data identification. And we enable it for up to 83 countries, I believe, as far as the number of countries that are covered by our DLP solution. And so it's an excellent solution for compliance. The second part, as far as the right partner, we've seen over actually last several years, companies change, the vendors change, they get bought, different things happen. And then it has a material impact on the type of service that you're able to receive and the type of support, and then the ability to understand what's the roadmap, what's coming up, and what you're able to look forward to in terms of future activity with that DLP vendor. And when there's changes, like one I'm thinking of in particular, the change occurred, and then the mother company ended up only really focusing on the very, very top customers, like the very, very top largest customers. All the rest of them, they literally had thousands of customers. They no longer got the type of support and care that they had been used to with that vendor. and it materially impacted their business. It made it difficult for them. And so, with us, as far as with Forcepoint, just putting a plug for that, we do very much care about our DLP customers. DLP is an important part of our business. It's important as far as every one of our customers. We want to make sure that they're successful, that they're heroes in terms of being able to take care of security and create a secure environment. So that's an important part. The last part, though, critically, is the right strategy. And this particularly, we're thinking in the context of migration, is migrating from an existing DLP solution that you may have deployed, 5-10 years ago, to a leading strategy DLP like Forcepoint. Having the right strategy on what are the steps to do that is very important. And so that's what Abdul will be speaking to. He's going to be speaking to 6 steps that we have in our practice for helping customers through the migration. Abdul, do you want to start with these?
Sure. Yeah, and I think to overcome the entire thing, we treat data with respect. That's what I want to sort of start off with. It's when we're working with customers and partners, want them to have the comfort that learn from experience. We're going to treat your data with respect. And as they migrate to a new platform, what we've done is, as we go through multiple customers, hundreds of customers, thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of hours, what we've done is kind of outline, create a framework of how to migrate successfully. And some of them are, of course, right, I should do this. But if you'll go through, right, scope, review current environments, installation, migration, monitoring, testing, and knowledge transfer, we'll talk about, Kevin, just key criteria and ideas that has helped us in migrating successfully and really efficiently. At the end of the day, our job is to make sure the customer's data is protected and it's transparent to their end user.
Let's go ahead to this first one, the area of scope and project initiation. Maybe could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so everything, as you know, it starts with the scope. You want to know what the end goal is. Instead of measure twice, cut once. You'll hear me say that many times. So we start off with the project scope. We're talking to the client. We're understanding, what are their priorities, short-term, long-term goals. Is there a deadline, renewal, compliance? Is there a merger activity that you mentioned? Understanding what the end goal looks like really helps us understand what timelines do we have. What do we need to focus on? What channel? Is it endpoint and network? Is it cloud? Is it discovery? And sometimes customers may have an idea, Kevin, of what they want or what their priorities are, but understanding what their short-term and long-term goals are. What are the quick wins we can show them to build credibility and trust? Sometimes can change the scope, but everything starts off with what is the end goal? What are the use cases? What are your goals that you're trying to accomplish? We'll figure out, the X's and O's a little bit later. Let's talk about the scope and your priority. And once we've gotten that 50,000 feet overview, we'll start aligning resources not only on our end, but also on the customer end, and start confirming prerequisites to accomplishing those goals.
It's interesting, Abdul. I was wondering, as I was listening to you talk, how often is it that when you go into customers that they are aware of their scope and their goals, or how much time do you have to take just to kind of get it out of them and get it onto paper of what specifically they're looking to do typically?
Yeah. So some customers have a really clear idea of a deadline or renewal coming up. So what, I have an existing DLP environment that isn't perhaps giving me all the information that I need, or it's cost prohibitive as opposed to cost effective. So I by X number of date we have to get off of the platform. So there are hard but then again, that's just a date. We'll create a reverse timeline, as you'll see later on. And then there are times when customers are completely blank page. They're like, what, we really don't have a DLP environment. We think we do, but it's a brand new slate. And can you help us understand what does good look like? And we'll use that scope to develop what good looks like. at the end of the day, right, I'll say to sales upfront or customer, I'm not in sales. So at the end of the day, my job is to make sure to get you guys the wins you need for your leadership. And is it, hey, I have an insider threat activity happening, so I need to block USB. We had COVID come up and everybody needed to go remote. So how do I protect my remote workers while still continuing business? Because they need to be able to access my sensitive data. So what type of network layers do we have? What type of infrastructure do we have? And there are times when the customers may not have all the right tools and resources. So we're going to try and work with the customer as much as possible to make sure that this is, we're working within their resources and tools allotment. And most of the time, we are able to meet their short-term and long-term goals. There's very limited time that I've seen where a short-term goal was, hey, we need to do X, Y, and Z, but the customer themselves weren't actually ready. But it's a mixed bag.
Well, it's interesting as you're talking. I'm just thinking that and I've heard this from other customers as well, and some other people in our field, that they'll be dealing with a customer and they have this one really large issue that they're trying to deal with, and it's some timeline they've got to hit, and that's driving everything. It's driving the whole, the whole move to the new DLP. But then, as you're saying, as far as there's a lot of other things to think about, and so it's like to make sure that it's successful, and so that you bring all of those up with the customer and make sure that they're all detailed down. So that you've got that's an important part.
Yeah, we worked with. That's exactly what I enjoy, right? We had a large merger happen with a customer, billions of dollars in merger, thousands of employees, hundreds of thousands of employees, and everything from network to Active Directory merger to domain. We were able to work with the customer to understand, okay, in order to do X, Y, and Z goals, this is what you need. Here, let me help you. Let me build your business case as well. So then you can understand what your short-term and long-term goals are and achieving them. And this really starts with the scope and project initiation. You want to have a very clear idea of what you need to do and what those wins look like at the end.
Great. This next slide, you talk a lot about the team. I'm really interested to hear how this works out. How do you get to this team? How does this happen?
Yeah, this is certainly isn't an enumerated list, right? This is just based on our past experience and what we've seen works really well. Because you want to make sure a DLP isn't like any other solution, right? It's not like firewall. It's not a router or switch where you just kind of turn it on and it works. It's something you have to look at, something you have to study, you have to fine tune as time comes. So what we've put together, a lot of times customers ask, well, what does a successful DLP program look like? So what we've done is, we've created a small task list that says, these are the core teams that you need to bring on the table. These are the stakeholders you need to bring so we can talk to them and really understand what their concerns are. How are they using the DLP product day to day? A lot of times, the network engineer isn't perhaps talking to the escalation person, but they are, Kevin, related because the network team is responsible for giving visibility, but the escalation person is making sure that as the data comes in, he's reviewing or she's reviewing them. So, we want to make sure all these folks are at the table, providing us with their insight, how their, what their business goals are, day-to-day responsibilities, and then we can give, as you'll see later on, training and knowledge transfer to them and build the environment so then they feel comfortable owning it. And that's what it's all about at the end of the day. Our job is to make sure it's their product, it's their data, they need to be able to own it and giving them the tools and insights on owning it, after we've gone.
One thing with this team, I just wondering, as I look through the list of the people, is this like a particular size organization that would have all of these different people? And then if the organization wasn't of that size, whatever that size is, where say like example with the network security system engineer might be the same person, whereas other companies, you could have a network team of engineers, right? And so just how could this team shift based on size of organization to be able to accomplish all of these different skills and activities?
Yeah, great question. As we work, we work with large global multinational companies. So, you have folks that are network security engineers by the dozens working all across the globe in different languages. Conversely, you can have a small, mom and pop shop, not in a non-pejorative way, where everybody is sort of divided up in 3 people, right? The VP is also the compliance officer, and then there are, a couple of engineers that are your architects, your network, as well as your DLP SMEs. So there isn't a real right number. What we've tried to do is these are the skills that you need in order to make sure that everything is covered. There's no blind spots. Now, we've had customers that have a small army, right, of incident handlers and event escalations just because they have, 500,000 employees and they just need to, right? There's only so much automation, that we can do in 2021. But conversely, we've had folks with 100,000 employees with a team as, 3 or 4 people, 5 people. So it's really a matter of these are the skills that you need in order to be successful. And that's what we help train, teach, and coach. There are times when what we'll also do is help, onboard a customer as they're onboarding migration. Say, this is something we can train you guys on. We can suggest, resources. We can provide resources to really make sure it's comfortable as you're onboarding and migrating your DLP environment.
Great. The next slide, this one goes into the timeline, and I'm real interested to hear how you see this rolling out for organizations, how they get to 16 versus 6. As far as we talked about before, it could be as 6 weeks.
I'm a visual person, right? So this, and our job is to make sure that at any stage the customer knows exactly where they are. And as we're understanding customers' short-term and long-term goals, we're preparing and planning to make sure we meet those at the end of the day, full stop, period. We had a recent successful implementation of 100,000 endpoints in 6 weeks.
Wow.
From 0 to 100,000 of agents, because the customer not only was motivated, but they had a strict timeline. There were penalties assigned to it. So when push comes to shove, we will work with you to make sure we're making you successful. Now, taking a step back, what I usually do is a conservative, a 16-week enterprise. So this is certainly not a 5,000 seat customer or 1,000 seat customer, but this is 30,000, 50,000, 100,000. Where what are you going to expect in the first week, second week, third week? And it gives, honestly, the customer comfort to know, okay, they have done it before, and I know what to expect. It's not a surprise to them that, oh my God, what is going to happen, in week 5 or 6? Well, they know what's going to happen. We're going to start with scope. We're talking about it, and we're going to create a project timeline for them. And that's something I would definitely ask, as a customer, if they're migrating, be sure to ask for a project timeline so you know exactly what's going to happen and you can report up, or you are in control of, yep, this is on week 4, this is what's going to happen, this is the win marker. And that's what we try to do with this one. This is, think of it as an accordion, right? You can stretch it, you can extend it, and during the scope we're on the same page, so we don't have to, and we use this as a good rubric of high level. This is obviously very high level, right? We'll go through much deeper stuff, but this just shows, okay, at any given week, this is where I'm at with the customer.
One of the things that just leaps out at me, I on the left, each one of these are the 6 steps essentially, right? That we're going through, and right now we're in the scope and project initiation discussion, and that one by far has the most weeks. I mean, that has 9 weeks so it's over half of the deployment is around the scope and project initiation. So it kind of speaks to the importance of planning up front and really understanding the environment, and then executing, and then putting that together.
Exactly. Measure twice, cut once, because you don't want to appear to go fast, you want to actually go fast and efficiently.
Okay, to move ahead, I think we're next to the second area, the review current environment.
Yeah.
If you could talk to that.
Of course. So now we're getting into, we've asked the customer, right? And as a customer, the client, you know my goals, my short-term, long-term goals, the resources that I have, my constraints. So now what we're really important is to actually review the environment firsthand. So we'll ask customers to, run diagnostics so we can understand their footprint. This is us collecting the data. This can take anywhere between a couple of hours, to be honest, to a couple of weeks. It really just depends on how easily the data is available. So, what does your mail traffic look like? So we can size you properly. How many incidents are you creating? So we can make sure you have enough database. How much are you partitioning? How much are you archiving? What is your data retention rate? This is part of, once again, Kevin, just understanding the customer environment so we can serve them better. And then as we start implementing and putting in, as you'll see, right, the implementation plan, we know exactly what we need to change, what we can make better, what do we need to enhance. And here's where we're understanding those use cases. A lot of times when customer says, I want to be PCI compliant. Well, that could just mean as simple as a lunch check, which, it's just 10 to 16 digit card numbers, but those can get complex. So what we're trying to see is, okay, well, what action plan are you doing? Is that really important? Who are you trying to notify? Is it a block? Is it an alert? Is it monitor? And beyond just a lunch check, which is quite simplistic, are you looking at expiration date? Are you looking at names? Are you looking at more than 5, unique credit cards? So this is sort of where we're trying to get a lot of that information. And we're also understanding what customers' false positive rate looks like. What are their pain points? And we're trying to map with what they've said with kind of what the environment looks like. And then we're translating that into Forcepoint environment. Kevin, it's not always a one-to-one, right? There's a lot of times when we've been able to shrink the footprint. There are a lot of times, as I can tell, when we enable even the default policy, we can reduce the number of false positives. But during the later stages, we'll work towards reducing that even more. So this is understanding the environment and then mapping it to where they are right now, what do they feel comfortable with, and then how does that translate into really Forcepoint environment.
Right. Yeah. So you do put down you italicize that particular bullet. How does this translate to a Forcepoint environment? You have on our next slide, there is this looks like a translation activity. I don't know, maybe you can talk more on that.
Yeah, so we, and I've been here for about 7.5 years, so I'm very used to knowing, okay, what is a protector, what is a gateway crawler, but my own biasness, not everybody knows what a protector or a crawler is or a DLP manager. So what we'll do is, if depending on you're migrating from Symantec or McAfee or any other DLP solution, we want to sing from the same sheet of music. And this really helps a customer know that, okay, when anybody from Forcepoint, not just myself or my team, anybody, when they mention a protector or a gateway, whether it's the SC, support, TAM, product management, this is what they mean. And it's really important to establish this type of understanding up front, because then you're not saying, oh, I wonder what a crawler is. Oh, I wonder what a protector is. And this is sort of the level of detail we sometimes have to go to make sure the customer really understands that this is what we mean. And we've created, as you go scroll through the next slide as well, kind of a little cheat sheet, right? So when we talk about database fingerprinting or file fingerprinting, it may mean EDM and IDM. So when, just what you're used to saying, EDM, IDM, this is what we mean. When we're talking about roles and incident status, this is what it means within Forcepoint syntax versus, in this case, Symantec. And what I found is it really helps understand the jargon. It really helps understand and keeps everybody on the same page, because now you're not thinking about what did I mean when I said database fingerprinting, or is that EDM? Or I'm not thinking, okay, EDM Is that file? Is that a classifier? Everybody's on the same page, and it just makes the process much more smoother. And you're used to now, saying the right conditions. And
yeah, this speaks a lot to, as far as, I mean, your guys' experience. I mean, if you do enough of these, you get a very clear idea of this is what this is in the pre-existing, the prior environment. This is how it's talked about. This is what it is. And you're able then to help customers say, see, this is what we call it in Forcepoint. And then just they can quickly get up to speed on that and then understand what it is. I noticed on the last slide as well, some of those arrows went to like protector. They would go to let me go back.
Yeah, from a gateway to a protector.
Yeah. That they went to multiple. Yeah, it's just so there's some streamlining even that goes on, for the customer to help them to be able to maybe even simplifies it for them a bit.
And once again, I think this goes to the ease of this, right? We want to do is make it as easy for you to translate, because believe it or not, this is something that we found that was a burden, because no one goes to school, right, for Forcepoint or learning Forcepoint syntax. So how do I make sure that the customer is very easily able to migrate and once again own the solution? And believe it or not, this has really helped us just putting things not just verbally, but in an image. Visually you can see, you can map it, and it really does help get people up to speed much more quickly.
That's great. This next one you have, it looks like it's more of the process for the reviewing the environment. Maybe you could talk to that.
Yeah, so this is really where, once again, I enjoy quite a bit. A lot of times the luxury is something that I really enjoy working with a customer. And there are times when we can map exactly what they're currently doing, right? You talked about, we have about 1,500, 1,600 plus out of the box policies. And many times we can just map those. For financial, there's really no reason where we found to fingerprint a lot of the data, because it's repeatable from a compliance perspective. Healthcare is a little bit, different because there's patient data, there's different ID numbers that different hospital systems or insurance company uses. So this is a chance for us to really sit with the customer and understand their environment, things that were working well, things that haven't been working well, and how can we use our product to better serve them. There's a lot of times that we'll talk to them where we're like, what, this is what a healthcare new law is coming down. There's one in California. Are you considering this? So this is our opportunity to bring them to the table and have them consider maybe something else that they weren't thinking about, and maybe refresh as we move into a new environment. What we don't want to do is just basically do a lift and shift, right? Sometimes that's what is needed, but a lot of time what we found as we are migrating is there's a lot of optimization opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities to improve the current environment. And this is our opportunity to just kind of really sit with them and understand their data, their users, their concerns. And it goes beyond just your short-term and long-term goals. It goes very much into the details of, what notification do you want to send out? What type of visibility do you want to have to the customer? Do you want it stealth mode so you can monitor their activities and behavior so you can build a case? Does this allow you to build a case and take it to a court? Is the chain of evidence okay? Who has access to all this stuff? So this really gets down into much more granular detail. And then we'll also prioritize, as it says here, because there are times when you don't want to boil the ocean, right? If a customer, for example, was fingerprinting everything, we don't want to fingerprint everything, right? I'll be honest and upfront. I've never really seen that work well. There are times and place for fingerprint. So this is where we really have that discussion on, look, this is what we can do. And then we'll prove it out, right? As it says, we'll test it. Don't just take my word for it. At times we will, maybe have a test environment or go for labs. We'll test it out. We don't, you'll see me again, we don't cross our fingers and hope for the best. No, let's prove it. Let's make sure it works best for you.
Now you do talk in the next one as far as there's a couple more steps that are on the reviewing the current environment. I particularly have the one around creating the mapping controls report. I don't know if you could go ahead and speak to those.
Yeah, so as we're talking, the scope and review environments, there's going to be enhancements, risks, gaps that we talk about. So, this is our opportunity to also understand and highlight those. It's not always going to be, 100%. So this is our opportunity to really be clear on this is a enhancement opportunity. These are gaps and these are risks. It could be resources, it could be product, it could be environment related, etc. And then what we'll do is we'll create a controls report. Information travels in different ways, but we found that this report is sort of an XY graph. So, what we'll do is we'll really create those types of granular reports so everybody has a clear visual idea of what is the expectation of my use cases. And everybody's once again on the same page.
That's great. Now it looks like the next step is getting into the actual installation activity.
Yeah.
So I'm eager to hear about this.
Yeah, so this is, as I would say, the easy part, right? I tell the customers, right, you're not having me on the calls or my team on the calls to install the product. I mean, we will install the product, hands to keyboard, but I can give you the deployment guide, right? You can just follow along the deployment guide. Installation is easy, right? There's support. There's a lot of resources out there. But what we want to do is make sure that we're getting every small ounce and every small drop out of the product to make sure it's best for you, because we don't want it to be shelfware. And we also don't want you to guess if you're doing it right or wrong. It's, I'm a huge F1 racer. Anybody can sort of drive the F1 car, but you really need that team of engineers, mechanics, drivers, all on the same page to get the best performance out of the car. And that's what we try to do. We'll create your high-level documentation, low-level documentation. We'll teach you how to install and drive and configure. And then, part of installation configuration is connectivity testing, that end-to-end, make sure that things are working. And really the installation, as I said, can take anywhere between a couple of hours to a couple of days, right? Installation of Forcepoint isn't really that hard if you've done sort of that hard work of understanding what your scope is, understanding the prerequisites and getting it. And what we'll do a lot of times here is we'll give you documents so you can take it to your database team, so you can take it to your networking team. So you can take those documentation to a third party, even if they are in charge of your servers or if they're in charge of provisioning the environment. So you know what you need to provision, you know what servers are used for what, and you know what type of policies, right, we're going to be using.
That's great. Now we're moving on to the migration, right, the actual move. So why don't you go ahead and start with this?
Yeah, so like I said, installation and configuration, we're just doing sort of initial testing connectivity. Is the product deployed properly? Do we have the right specifications? Connectivity testing is fine. End-to-end, I'm seeing data. Now it's turning that into your actual environment, right? So we'll reference the control documents. We'll perform configurations, and this is where we, Kevin, start seeing the first value, as we call it, from our solution.
What does first value look like? How can you tell the first value?
So a lot of times during scope, well, every time during scope, your short-term goals, if you will, right? So my first value is I need to have, 50,000 agents deployed, or I need to have my network is my biggest concern, or my USB is my biggest concern, or storage is biggest concern. So we'll focus on your first value by applying those policies. So USB always needs to be encrypted. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and go through, install the agents, and create a policy where USB is encrypted. And first value is really to make sure that you see the value of the product. Now we've reached first value in as little as a week, right? After installation, we've seen first value for large customers, take a month, right? It's 2 months. It really just depends on how quickly the customer wants to move, right? There are times when we've given sort of carte blanche access, right? Here you go, guys. You know our large picture, go do it. So we've been onboarded, we've been given computers, and we just go to work. And we ask the questions, et cetera, as we need to. And here you go, here's first value. First value is something tangible that you can show your leadership team.
Right. Okay. And so that's actually when you get into deployment. It's out of test, it's in production to some extent anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're not in your small, security operation group team. It's a little bit larger pilot or maybe user, testing group, or you're starting off with. But it's you see the value of the product, and first value is different for a lot of customers. Some customers, it's my first value needs to be, I need to see installation, and I need to see at least for 25 users or 5% of my workforce positive deployment without latency. So great, we'll work towards and march towards that. Or hey, from a mapping controls document, I need to focus on this policy because this is our biggest, most important critical policy, right? No sensitive data can leave. Okay, great. So we'll make that policy, we'll test it out, make sure that's hitting, and it's hitting to, a little bit of a wider group of audience. Now, we may not be in full production because that's what we call full value. This is your first tangible value that you've hit.
That's great. I noticed also under the stress testing area, you talk about gauging the false positive incident rate, and that's a big issue. I constantly hear about that. That's why they get DLP and want strong DLP, is to be able to deal with false positives effectively. And so what typically is, what should a customer expect? If they've gone to this point, should they see a noticeable difference from what they were with their prior solution, or what are you looking for?
Yeah, great question. And we there was a recent survey back in March that was done. They interviewed SOC analysts, and majority of them, overwhelming majority of them, said anywhere between 25 to 75% of their policies were false positives, and they, near majority, I think about 49%, said that they actually turn off the high alerts. We don't want you to do that. Right. So when we go through environment review and we're doing the scope, and we create that mapping of what we're going to do, we're looking at what's the false positive rate right now. Is there false negative? Are there ways that we can improve it? And we're testing it with live traffic. We've sort of done the connectivity testing, but we're asking customers to provide us with prior false positives and false negative, and we'll run that data through the environment. And more often than not, vast majority of the time, right, the system just out of the box policies is good enough to not trigger on a false positive. A good example was MasterCard numbers. Everybody, the customer was having a lot of high rates when someone would, or it was having false negative because it wasn't picking up when someone would type in the number and maybe put spaces or dashes between the digits, and that was sort of a way. However, in small use case, but it was really important to this bank to make sure that no one could exfiltrate credit card data through just dashes and dots. So we looked at their biggest, most problematic challenge, tested it, right? Okay, we need to create this little regex. Great. And you know what? Within a day, we were able to make sure that people couldn't exfiltrate data using different obfuscation methods. And that's just an example of that stress testing, where we're really looking at their biggest and most important problems that they've seen in the past and making sure that the product is resilient towards that.
That's awesome. And then the last part you do talk about is resolving gaps with known workarounds. And then out of here, you talk about out-of-the-box policies and fingerprint options. And you'd mentioned before, you don't want to fingerprint everything, but it looks like here is a place where you're looking to fingerprint. So what's going on?
Yeah. So it's we've done it enough to know that you need to have a plan if something goes wrong, right? I think it's Mike Tyson's, right? Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. So we know that there's going to be issues. There's going to be unknowns, right? It's how you prepare and plan for it, and how do you react to it is really the important piece. So in the scope environment review, we're already kind of keen to, okay, yep, you know what, can potentially be an issue. This can be a latency, or hey, you know what, this is a future fix. There's a new version of a browser that just came out, for example, or you know, I can list hundreds. But how do I overcome it? Whether it's a new build, selecting the right build, for example, right? We have different versions, and then there are going to be times when we have to fingerprint, or we have to use different methods of identification and efficacy of the policy. We have out of the box policies, and I use this example of credit card. Once again, right? Credit card, banking, there's very limited options for, or excuse me, there's not a lot of need for fingerprinting because there's been so robust compliance around it. Healthcare is a little bit separate story, so is education and manufacturing. But from a financial perspective, there's a lot that we can do with just simple regex and out of the box. But then there are times when customers do want to fingerprint, their account numbers that may be alphanumeric, that something that they're very specific, or they work with a third-party insurance companies, or they work with a payment processing company. So there's all these different little items that we do want to fingerprint. So what we try to do is, okay, let's take a look at what is your data. Can we get it done with the least computationally expansive environment? And then if we can't, then what is the next option? Fingerprint. And if we need to fingerprint, we're not going to shy away from it. We are going to fingerprint data. We can fingerprint data. We can actually push it down to the endpoint level. So the agent itself can run those fingerprint options. And so I can take my laptop, I can be off network, and from a fingerprint perspective, you're still checking those fingerprint items as opposed to having to go all the way back to a different server, check the hashes, etc. So we're not going to shy away from it, but what we're going to do is make sure we're not computationally excessive into your environment. And this is where we come up with a workaround.
You have a couple of other things too in this process of migration. I guess to wrap it up, what would these be?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is the standard, right? We'll ask the customer, what is your standard policy before you roll it out to production, right? Who needs to sign off? So what does the acceptance testing look like? As I said, it could be a couple of days, a couple of weeks, could be months. And what we really ask, it's a little bit different, is we're not going to change your behavior. We don't want to change your behavior. We want to do your work. Just go do your work, do your business. We want to be as transparent as possible. So while we're doing really the hard testing of what worked and what didn't work from the prior environment, we just want you to go about your normal work, your employees to go just do what they normally do. And we're looking at the data with your team and helping you decipher what is false positive, false negative, and then sort of, as you see in the next environment, kind of tuning. But this is just, can I do my job? Can I do my job well? Is anything interrupting, interfering? And, it's just a simple sign off, right? We want to make sure the end users at the end of the day can do your job. A lot of times people see DLP as a barrier for business. That's why they don't adopt it or they don't work on it. I want to really get rid of that myth. It can help make you stronger and help enable you to take the cloud. It helps you really enable a much more faster digital transformation. So don't really look at it as a burden or a hindrance, but just do your business and we'll do the workarounds for you.
Great. That's the end goal. A lot of times what we think about is just that we just want to keep a secure environment. It's easy to keep a secure environment. Don't let any data out, then it's completely secure. But then what we really want is we want to enable businesses to grow and thrive. I mean, we really want them to be able to be successful. And that's not a security goal. It's a business goal overall. I noticed too, you talk about as far as rolling it out, kind of have after hours by stages, regions, kind of get it more modular. So at the same time, their prior DLP, it's running as well across the rest of their environment. Is that what's going on?
Absolutely, right. So we let's say someone already has a DLP environment. they're a multinational corporation, or they could be, one environment where everybody's going through one. We'll, work with them really around the scope and project and review the current environment to say, you know what, we'll focus on, while you keep this up, we'll focus on these sets of business units or these sets of users or this set of domains, or this IP, network range. And that really helps us cut over and do us a good idea of what the testing needs to be. But there are times when, Kevin, we're like, we feel comfortable of you cutting over your entire environment, your entire region, your entire, plant, if you will. So if the testing is done well, and we're very thorough with that, we can start migrating, large regions. But you want to do it in stage. You want to do it where business is still impacting. If it's end of quarter, or if it's the holidays, for example, when maybe you're not getting the best of data, and we'll tell the customer up front, you know what, Thanksgiving, at least in US, November to Christmas and New Year's, we don't necessarily see a lot of the right data. And there are a lot of times that customers are in a change freeze as well. So, is it better to wait until the start of the year to change? Because then we can see really good acceptance testing. Those are all the conversations we are having and we need to have, and the customer needs to have in order to know what timeline they need to do it at. And this is where that happens.
Yeah, it's great. Going on to, we're moving on to step 5, as this is, we're actually getting in monitoring and testing. So at this point, even before you get to this, has the migration been completed?
Yeah.
And then now you're doing the monitor. This is the monitoring part. Okay. Well,
exactly.
Go ahead.
Right. Yeah. So no, this is once again, if the customer, right, we've done it enough to know there's not going to be a lot of surprises for us. But you still want to monitor and test, right? We'll work with the customer during the testing phase and the rollout, sort of the migration and installation phase, to understand what are your applications that you're using. Anybody from marketing, as you're aware, they tend to use a lot of different, open source stuff, or IT teams or dev, to legal, what applications need to be done, how are they using the business. That's why going about your business and us really getting visibility into it gives us an idea of, I don't want to change your behavior. I just want you to do what you're doing. And then we'll fine tune and test. But as we roll out, right, there's going to be, once again, right, unknowns. And this monitoring and testing stages helps us mitigate that risk as much as possible. There's, I'll be, lying if I said, what, first cut, it's going to be perfect. No, it's going to be monitoring and testing, because there are times when we're only in production for the top, 10 policies. And once you're in full production, the customer might have additional policies that they now want to implement. They may not be as critical, but they are important to the business. It could be acceptable use for language if it's in school or healthcare. So that's what we're also trying to do. We're just making sure that the product is working as they intended. We're monitoring and testing again and again. And once I, go again, it's not, I hope this works. It's very much right. Let's be really clear about it. And then this is also a time where we can create different levels of reporting, right? We'll have a good idea what type of reports the customer generates at the start, because we're looking at their current environment, we're understanding the scope. But there are times when we're also telling the customer, hey, this is a great report to show your leadership team on the efficacy of policies reduction, incident reduction, data loss reduction.
The one thing with this, it seems it's really interesting. And again, what I've heard from our field as well is when they're working with customers, they often will just deploy it. They deploy it to a point and they just leave it. And there really is an enormous amount of additional value that could happen if they were to go through the fine tuning aspect. I know you do talk to it here as far as the different levels for data identification. And it's just, I've often heard that a lot of our customers they'll stop at regular expressions and file types, for example. And there really is this whole level of richness in terms of identification that they could be applying if they went through this monitoring and testing step, if they made sure did it.
Yeah, absolutely. And this really helps us once again kind of put it visually of what is and the type of data that we also want to fingerprint, right? Once again, we don't want to fingerprint blanket environment, right? We want to be very careful and thoughtful of what type of structure we're doing. Use machine learning. And one of the things that Forcepoint's really great at is you don't have to provide a false positive and a false negative to get machine learning as like other tools. You can only provide one. And as you get more data, you can start feeding into it. And it'll tell you the efficacy level. So it's great for source code, for example, things that perhaps you can't fingerprint and things that are dynamic and not static, like an M&A contract, if you will. And this also allows you to move beyond monitoring and encryption stage to actually block stage, that monitoring and testing, because there are times when customers, rightfully so, they don't want to block, or there's some block avoidance, and block is important, right? If it's source code that's company proprietary information, you want to block it no matter how small or big it is. But if it's something that's public knowledge out of GitHub, you know what, that's someone's public source code, so that's fine. So this allows us to really, once again, from monitoring and testing, make the customer feel comfortable to going beyond just a monitoring and notifying stage to really taking block actions and start looking at the, as I like to say, the sharpest needle in the haystack, because there may be many needles in that haystack. Let's really look at the sharpest one.
Right. Now you do have a couple other points to this step.
Yeah, this is sort of very simple, right? It's once you have a good environment, backup. In my previous life, from a support perspective, you want to prepare for the worst, have quality backups. It's, say one more, have a quality backup because it'll, and not on the same server, have it somewhere else. And so we can easily restore it if you need to, if there's a DR situation. There are a lot of DR activities that we'll go through, and high availability and recovery with the customer. So this is sort of that part of that cutover, as well. Like, hey, I want to bring down this entire environment. I want to shift all my traffic. Can your environment handle, right, if one system is down? And then how long will it take to bring it up? So we go through a lot of that procedure as well. And part of it is, what, we feel comfortable checking off, let's go ahead and back up and install.
That's great. Then you do talk down here below too, as far as for the standard operating procedure confirmed for various stakeholders, performing a tabletop exercise. So what would that be?
Yeah, so before we could travel, right, we would literally sit around a table and we would make sure everybody from the client side knew their responsibilities and roles. So if there was a new use case that needed to happen, everybody from the chief compliance officer, risk officer, legal, the business unit, DLP, SME, everybody knew how to put that use case in the environment. If there was an incident that occurred, a violation of a policy, the cybersecurity response team knew how to properly triage. If there was an issue, you knew how to handle it on a system level and a policy level. So we'll, sort of, it's part of the knowledge transfer. If you scroll ahead, as we're monitoring and testing, we're looking at customers' live data, and we're actually giving that knowledge transfer to the customer. Because once again, I think we said it before, I'll say it again, we want them to use the tool. We want them to feel comfortable using the tool. And we have admin trainings, we have system engineering trainings out of the box. But what we're also doing is providing this bespoke level of knowledge transfer. There's going to be knowledge transfer from start to end, but really at the end, what we want to do is make sure the customer feels comfortable with the solution. It's something, if you feel comfortable with it, if you know it, you're going to use it again and again. You're not just going to sort of open up a dashboard and feel frustrated of where to go, where to click, what to do. So part of that includes, knowledge base articles. You have no idea how many times I've actually heard customers say, this is probably what saved me the most time because 6 months from now, 7 months from now, I need to run a debug on a log. I know exactly based on the article which line to click debug on and generate the logs. And a lot of time we'll provide them with insights on how to best open up a ticket within Forcepoint, right? What type of data that they need to capture that'll be helpful. Sometimes data is really difficult reproducing. So you want to reproduce that data at that time. And we'll train everybody from tier 1 analyst, tier 2, etc. on collecting the data while it's happening, how to upload it, what type of keywords perhaps to use when opening up a ticket. So the support team knows exactly what the issue is, and they can either help you resolve it or you can resolve it yourself.
Okay, now we get to the that final step of the knowledge transfer, the actual sign off. So maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, so this is kind of where our work ends, right? At least originally at the journey, we mapped out what your full value, your first value and your full value looks like. And this is really where, based on the statement of work as a client, you'd want to make sure you're getting your full value. Whether it's installation, knowledge transfer, we usually send out a survey, right, to make sure we can improve. And then we'll transfer you into support. A lot of times it's very natural transitions. If you have a technical account manager, customer advocate, they'll be part of the journey, Kevin. So they know, what the installation looked like. They know what the gaps and the risks are. They knew your long-term and short-term goals. So it's not a cold handoff of, what, we're done, go. So it's a very smooth handoff where the support engineer or the TAM takes over. If you have a residency, right, if you had a gap information, this is where the residency will take place as well, where, I need to now expand into, more policies or continual fine tuning, creating different custom reports. And that's really what that project sign off on knowledge transfer looks like. It could be as little as 1 hour. It could sometimes be as little as, or I guess a couple of weeks. It really just depends on you've achieved your full value, you feel comfortable and confident with the product, and now we're close to that stage.
That's great. Looking again then at the just kind of key takeaways. This is a sort of summary of a lot of information, but if you could maybe go through this as far as what are the takeaways that we want people to leave with after listening to all of this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there are 4 really key ones, right? As a customer, I want to make sure I have clear goals and use cases, and they don't have to be in perfect format to where we can create that map-based report. No, just very plainly in layman, tell us, right? We're the experts and we'll help you, right? Translate those use cases into the policy. So just all we ask is have your short-term and long-term goals and your use cases in layman's language. And make sure you share those. Identify any transition dates. So please, tell us critical dates, deadlines, because we can help to create a reverse timeline from it. We can move as fast as you want. Transition in stages, right? That's key. You don't want to go from 1 employee to employee testing to production, right? 100,000 employees. Let's go in phase approach, because what I don't want to do is take 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And this entire migration process is to make sure it's slow, but it's methodical, is what I would actually say. It makes you efficient in the long run. And then, you want to pick the right solution at the end of the day, right? As you've clearly identified your goals and use cases, a lot of times, right, we've seen where Forcepoint can partner with Bolden James, for example, for data classification. So we can help you, or Microsoft, right? We can say, you know what, this is not something we do well, but here's a customer that does it just as great, or here's a company that does just as great, and we can help you. And we can tell you, right, what other customers are doing, what are the other good stuff in your industry, so you can really gain the benefit of that and help establish your strategy with us, along with us.
Great. Great. Well, thanks again, Abdul. This has been a very informative time for me as well. Just hearing all the different steps and the stages. It looks like it's, I ideally, I think hopefully for our customers that are watching this, they could see that a lot of the risk of the DLP transition is taken out by this process. And they can come away pretty confident. They can come away confidently that a transition to Forcepoint DLP can be done well, and they can be very successful. So thanks again.
Right, it was a pleasure. Yeah, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.